Good morning, this is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we are on Lesson 21 of the Gospel of Mark. We're covering Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 52, and this one's called The Power of Paradox. In Mark 10, there are multiple teachings by Jesus that seem to be paradoxes. The first involved marriage, where a man and woman would be joined together, and the two shall be one flesh. How is it possible for two to become one? Only through God. Next, Jesus taught that adults needed to come to him as children. As we cannot return to the womb, how can adults become children again? Well, only through God. In addition, he taught that it was possible for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, and also that the first shall be last. God can make the impossible possible, and the multitudes and disciples following Jesus certainly knew that. Those paradoxical teachings will continue, but beforehand, Jesus explains to his disciples what is going to take place when they get to Jerusalem. This is the third time he will explain this to them. Let's read the first passage. Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 34 says this. Now they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was going before them, and they were amazed. And as they followed, they were afraid. Then he took the 12 aside again, and began to tell them the things that would happen to him. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and scourge him and spit on him and kill him. And the third day he will rise again. While this is not a paradoxical teaching by Jesus, it does involve what seems to be a paradox. Jesus, by this time, has spent 3 years with these 12 disciples. He knows everything about them, and they know much about him. They know that he is the Son of God. They know that he has power over demons, power over diseases and illnesses, power to forgive sins, power over the winds and the seas, power over the weather, and even the power over death. Only God has that kind of power. The paradox is that with all of this power, Jesus has explained to them that his enemies are going to kill him, and then he will rise again on the third day. On his third attempt to explain this to his disciples, Jesus goes into a little bit more detail and specifies that the ones who will kill him will be the chief priests and scribes. He also mentions that he will be betrayed. Enemies cannot betray enemies. Only friends can betray one another. So even though Jesus has not identified Judas at this time, he gave the disciples enough information for them to know that this entire process would begin with the betrayal of a dear friend. But the paradox involves the death of Jesus. It would seem that at least one of the 12 would have asked Jesus some questions concerning what was to happen, to understand this a little better. For example, how is it even possible for someone with the power of Jesus to be overtaken and killed by people without power? How is it possible that if Jesus knows exactly what is about to happen, that he cannot sidestep the plans of others? Certainly there are answers to those questions, but the disciples did not know Jesus well enough to come to the correct conclusions. The only accurate conclusion was that this is what Jesus came to accomplish. It was his plan all along. And the only ones that could put him to death were the ones he allowed to do so. It still is amazing that after Jesus shares this information with his disciples 3 different times, and additional times a bit more subtly, but when Jesus is arrested, tried, crucified, and resurrected, these disciples are completely unprepared. Of course, Jesus knew, even when he was telling them of these events, that they did not grasp the implications. Let's read the next passage. Mark chapter 10, verses 35 through 45 says this. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They said to him, We are able. So Jesus said to them, You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. It is possible that the disciples did understand what Jesus was telling them about his impending death, but just forgot about it later. Because it almost seems as if James and John are posturing for position, knowing that Jesus is not going to be with them much longer. Well, it's now or never. In the other Gospels, we also can see that the mother of James and John played her part in this process as well. The similarity is interesting. They were asking to be high and lifted up, when very shortly Jesus would be high and lifted up on a cross, where he would die. Be careful what you ask for, James and John. It is interesting that of the 11 disciples who would still be alive after the resurrection of Jesus, James would be the first one to die. King Herod Agrippa I beheaded James about 11 years after the death of Jesus in 44 AD. And the other side of the coin was John, the brother of James, who would die last after all of the other apostles. John would be the only one not martyred, and he died around 99 AD. The other disciples were not happy with James and John after this interchange. Likely it was because James and John asked what they wanted to ask and did so before any of them got the chance. It is highly doubtful that any of these disciples had the purest of motives at that time. But Jesus was not finished with them yet. Next, Jesus goes into another paradoxical teaching, and this one tells them that it is the servants who will be the rulers. These 12 disciples had the perfect example standing right in front of them, and for 3 years they had seen the one with the most power acting as a servant to all. Let's read the last passage. This is Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52, and it says this. Now they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Then many warned him to be quiet, but he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. Then they called the blind man, saying to him, Be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. So Jesus answered and said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. Then Jesus said to him, "Go your way. Your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. They are approaching Jerusalem from Jericho. This Jericho was not the same one where the walls came tumbling down, but instead was a new city built about 1 mile away by Herod the Great. It was his winter palace. According to Matthew, there were 2 blind beggars who were sitting beside the roadside that day. But Mark only identifies one. Bartimaeus is calling out for Jesus, and Jesus asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" That may seem like a strange question to ask a blind man who is asking for help, but physical sight is a much lesser gift than spiritual sight. Bartimaeus could have asked for something even more spectacular. Notice that Bartimaeus refers to Jesus as Rabboni, meaning master. Mary Magdalene was the only other one to call Jesus this in John 20, verse 16. And we also should notice that Bartimaeus calls Jesus Son of David twice. This blind beggar knew who Jesus was. Notice that Jesus is on his way to the cross, as Jerusalem is only 14 miles up the road. But he stops to heal 2 blind beggars. Here's another paradox. This blind man sees Jesus more clearly than others with perfect vision, at least physically. In one moment, Bartimaeus goes from a poor blind beggar to a rich man with spiritual sight of the King of Kings and of the Lord of Lords. When Jesus enters our lives, we should reflect a similar change exhibited by this blind beggar, Bartimaeus, who could see Jesus. It might not be as instantaneous for us as it was for Bartimaeus. As we walk with Jesus, we should grow closer to him as we journey together. There are some Christians who remain anti-Semitic because they believe that the Jews were responsible for killing Jesus. Everyone was responsible for killing Jesus, and that includes each and every one of us, as it was our sins that placed him there. Nothing happened to Jesus that he had not preordained. That does not mean that we should not grieve what is about to occur, but never forget that we are responsible. Our sin placed him there, but his love took Jesus there willingly. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.